Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I want to start today with a bit of a thought experiment. It's something that was running through my head while I was reading through the sources for today.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine I hand you a sandwich. Let's make it a turkey club.
Yeah.
And I tell you that your job is to turn that sandwich into energy. Energy to power a machine. And you also have to extract all the raw materials, to repair that machine's structure.
Right.
And then whatever's left over, you have to safely get rid of it.
Okay, sounds like a pretty standard engineering problem so far.
But here's the catch. You have to do all of this processing inside a dark, wet, twisting tube. A tube that's about, 30 feet long?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't use your hands to move anything. You have to rely entirely on the walls of the tube to do the moving for you. And this is the real kicker. The timing has to be perfect.
Ah, there it is.
Right? If you move that sandwich through the tube too fast, the machine starves. It just starves because you didn't have enough time to extract the fuel.
Malabsorption.
Exactly. But if you move it too slow, the sandwich rots inside the tube. It literally starts to putrefy and poisons the whole machine.
Wow. When you frame it like that, it sounds less like an engineering problem and more like a logistical nightmare. Almost impossible.
And yet we all do it every single day, usually 3 times a day, sometimes more if you're snacking. Today, we are investigating the hidden choreography that makes this incredible feat possible. We're talking about gastrointestinal motility.
It's such a fascinating topic because, just like you said, we tend to focus on the chemistry, right? The stomach acid, the enzymes, the breakdown.
The chemical part.
Yeah, the chemical part. But none of that chemistry works without the movement, the physics of it.
Precisely. And to guide us through this, we're synthesizing 2 absolute heavyweights of the physiology world. We have Genein's review of medical physiology and, of course, the Guyton Hall textbook of medical physiology.
The 2 Bibles. And I think it's worth making a distinction between them for anyone listening who wants to go back and read the actual chapters, which, by the way, we can't recommend enough.
Oh, absolutely. Consider this conversation a conceptual map, maybe a scaffold. It is definitely not a replacement for reading the text.
Right. So, as you were reading, how did they feel different to you?
To me, Guénon felt a bit like the mechanic. The one with the schematic looking at the engine parts. It gives you the real nuts and bolts, the cellular mechanisms, the ion channels, the neural wiring.
That's a great characterization, I agree. Whereas Guyton, he reads a bit more like the systems engineer. He's looking at the whole factory. He's focused on flow, on pressures, on regulation, and how the gut has to integrate with everything else in the body to maintain, homeostasis.
So if we put them together, we get the full picture. We get the what from Guénon and the how from Guyton. And the central theme that just jumps off the page from both of them is that the gut is not a passive conveyor belt.
Not at all.
It's a dynamic choreography.
I love that phrase. It completely reframes the whole problem, doesn't it? Because the central issue of the gut, as you pointed out, is timing. Digestion is just a series of chemical reactions, and chemical reactions need contact time.
You have to mix the enzyme with the substrate.
You have to. If you just flush food straight through, almost nothing happens. It's a waste.
So that brings us to the byline for this deep dive. Progress depends not on force, but on coordinated motion.
Precisely. It's not about how hard you can squeeze. It's about when and where you squeeze, and just as importantly, when and where you relax.
Okay, let's jump in. Part 1, the hardware. We're going to understand the movement. We have to understand the machine itself, the muscle, the electricity, and the flow. And Guyton introduces a concept here that I found really, really interesting, the syncytium.
It's a great word, isn't it? Syncytium.
It sounds like something out of science fiction.
Well, it's absolutely fundamental to how the gut works. To get it, we should probably start with the basic anatomy. If you were to take a cross-section of the gut wall, you'd see these very distinct layers. You've got the serosa on the very outside, which is kind of the wrapper. Then you have the longitudinal muscle layer, where the fibers run lengthwise, down the tube.
Okay, so that would shorten the tube.
It would. And then just inside that, you have the circular muscle layer, which wraps around the tube like a series of rings.
And that would constrict it, make it narrower.
Exactly. So you have muscles running lengthwise and muscles running in circles. Then deeper in, you have the submucosa and the mucosa, which is the actual inner lining that touches the food. But the magic, the real magic of motility happens in those muscle layers.
So what's so special about them?
Well, think about your bicep. That's skeletal muscle. Each individual muscle fiber in your bicep is electrically isolated. It's wrapped in its own insulation.
So to make it contract, your brain has to send a specific signal down a specific wire to a specific group of fibers.
It's a direct command and control system. One nerve ending for a small motor unit. But in the gut, you have millions upon millions of smooth muscle cells. If you had to have a separate nerve ending for every single one of them, I mean, the wiring would be impossibly thick.
You need a nerve trunk the size of your leg just to run your small intestine.
You would. So evolution found a brilliant workaround. Gap junctions.
Okay, gap junctions.
Imagine all these smooth muscle cells are standing shoulder to shoulder and they're literally holding hands. Gap junctions are these little protein channels, these low-resistance portals that directly connect the cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of its neighbor.
So if one cell gets an electrical zap, it passes it directly to its neighbor, like a spark jumping a gap.
Instantly. Ions, calcium, sodium, they just flow freely from one cell to the next. So from an electrical perspective, the gut muscle doesn't behave like a million individual cells. It behaves as one single massive interconnected unit. That is a syncytium.
The analogy that immediately came to my mind was a stadium wave at a sports game.
That is the perfect analogy. It's perfect. You don't need the stadium announcer to call out individual seat numbers and say, okay, seat 4A, please stand up. Now seat 4B, stand up.
Right. You just see the person next to you stand up, and that's your cue. That pulls you up.
And that signal, that wave of activity, travels rapidly along the length of the muscle bundles. This is what allows for a unified, coordinated contraction rather than just chaotic twitching of individual cells. Without the syncytium, you wouldn't get peristalsis. You'd just get spasms.
Okay, so the structure allows the signal to travel. But what is the signal? Because this is where Guénon spends a lot of time differentiating between slow waves and spike potentials. And I have to be honest, at first glance, I thought they were basically the same thing.
And a lot of people make that mistake. But distinguishing them is absolutely critical to understanding motility. Think of the electrical activity in the gut like the ocean.
Okay, I'm with you. Picturing the ocean.
The slow waves, which are also called the basic electrical rhythm, or BER, are like the underlying swell of the ocean. The water level is just constantly, gently undulating. It's rising and falling, rising and falling.
So in the gut, this is the resting membrane potential of the muscle cells just waving up and down.
Precisely. Waving up and down by about 5 to 15 millivolts. It's this constant rhythmic hum in the background.
But, and this is the key point I really want to clarify, does that swell actually crash on the beach? Does the slow wave itself cause a contraction?
Usually no, and that's the most important thing to grasp. In most parts of the gut, the slow wave itself is just the potential for action. It's the background hum. It brings the muscle cell closer to its firing threshold, and then it pulls it away again. It's like a metronome just ticking in the background, setting the tempo.
Okay, so it's setting the rhythm, but it's not actually playing the note.
Beautifully put.
So if the slow wave is the metronome, what actually hits the drum? What causes the contraction?
That would be the spike potential. So going back to our ocean analogy, if that underlying swell gets high enough, let's say the tide comes in and pushes that swell over a certain critical height, which in the gut is about minus 40 millivolts, then the wave breaks, it crests, and it crashes.
And that crash is the spike potential.
That crash is the spike potential. It's a true action potential.
And that is what actually makes the muscle squeeze.
Exactly. The spike potential is what opens the voltage-gated calcium channels, allowing a flood of calcium to rush into the cell. And as we know, calcium is the molecular key that unlocks the machinery of contraction. So to summarize, the slow waves dictate when a contraction can happen, but the spike potentials, which are triggered by other things like stretch or hormones, determine if it does happen.
And who's setting the tempo for these slow waves?
Yeah.
Where does that metronome beat come from? Is it the brain?
Nope, it's local. It's a very specialized group of cells called the interstitial cells of Cadal, or the ICCs.
That sounds like a secret society or something.
Sure.
The interstitial cells of Cadal.
They kind of act like one. They're these star-shaped or stellate cells that are sandwiched between the muscle layers. They form a network. And they are the pacemakers. They're the ones that spontaneously generate this rhythmic electrical undulation.
And the tempo changes depending on where you are in the gut.
It does. The gut has different time signatures. In the stomach, it's very slow, about 3 to 4 waves per minute. But then you get to the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, and it's much faster, up to 12 per minute.
Why the difference?
Well, the duodenum is where you have this intense mixing of chyme with bile and pancreatic enzymes. It needs a faster rhythm to do that mixing effectively. Then as you go further down the small intestine into the ileum, it slows down again to maybe 8 or 9 waves per minute.
So the rhythm is tailored to the function of that specific segment.
Perfectly tailored.
Gannon also points out something interesting about the chemistry of these spike potentials. He says they rely on calcium-sodium channels, which are different from the fast sodium channels in our nerves and skeletal muscles. Why does the detail matter?
It matters for the quality of the movement, for the style of the contraction. Your nerves and skeletal muscles, they use these lightning-fast sodium channels. They flick open, they flick close. It's a very rapid, twitchy response.
Good for blinking an eye or throwing a baseball.
Great for that,
Eh,
but absolutely terrible for digesting a burrito.
right. Digestion needs a grind, not a twitch.
You need a sustained squeeze. The gut's smooth muscle uses these slow calcium-sodium channels. As the name suggests, they are much slower to open, and crucially, they stay open for much longer. This creates a long-duration action potential, sometimes lasting hundreds of milliseconds.
And that allows the gut to sustain a contraction, to squeeze and hold.
Exactly. It allows for what's called tonic contraction, a continuous state of partial contraction, which is essential for maintaining pressure in sphincters and for the slow, powerful grinding and mixing movements needed for digestion.
Okay, so we've got the hardware, the syncytium, we have the power supply, the slow waves, and the spikes. But a machine like this needs an operator. It needs a control room.
And this is where it gets really, really mind-blowing. The enteric nervous system, or ENS.
Guyton calls it the second brain, and the stats he quotes are just wild. More than 100 million neurons embedded in the gut lining. That's more neurons than in the entire spinal cord.
It is. And the most incredible part, the part that really defines it as a second brain, is its autonomy.
Its independence.
Yes. You can surgically sever the vagus nerve and all the sympathetic nerves. You can completely disconnect the head brain from the gut brain, and the gut will still function. It can still coordinate peristalsis. It can manage secretions. It can respond to a meal. It won't be as efficient or as well regulated, but the basic programs still run.
That just reinforces this idea that the gut is really a separate entity living inside us. It has its own intelligence, its own agenda.
It truly does. And this second brain is organized into two main layers, or plexuses, and you really need to understand both of them to get how the control works.
Okay, so we have the myenteric plexus and the submucosal plexus. The names actually seem to help here. Myo usually refers to muscle, so I'm guessing the myenteric plexus deals with the heavy lifting.
You've absolutely nailed it. The myenteric plexus, which is also known as Auerbach's plexus, is physically located right between those two muscle layers we talked about, the longitudinal and the circular.
Prime real estate for controlling movement.
The best. Because of its location, it is the motor manager. It forms this long linear chain of neurons that extends the entire length of the gut, from the esophagus to the anus.
So it's the engine room, the conductor.
It's the conductor, yeah. It controls the overall tone of the gut wall, it controls the intensity of the rhythmic contractions, and it controls the velocity of the peristaltic waves. If you want to move food faster or slower, the myenteric plexus is driving that decision.
Okay, so if the myenteric plexus is driving the car, what's the submucosal plexus doing?
The submucosal plexus, or Meissner's plexus, sits in the submucosa, so it's much closer to the inner lining, the mucosa. It's closer to where the action is in terms of the food itself.
It's got sensors on the ground.
Exactly. It's the sensory and secretory manager. It's analyzing the local environment. It's sensing the chemical conditions of the chyme, the pH, the osmolarity. And based on that information, it controls local blood flow, the secretion of digestive juices from the glands, and absorption across the gut wall.
So, broadly speaking, myenteric moves it, submucosal samples, and processes it.
That's a perfect division of labor. One is about macro-level propulsion. The other is about micro-level control of the local environment.
Now, within this nervous system, there's a whole chemical soup of neurotransmitters. We all know about the classic ones, acetylcholine, which is generally excitatory,
And norepinephrine, which is generally inhibitory.
but Guyton and Gannon list a whole pharmacy of others: substance P, serotonin, dopamine, somatostatin.
It's incredibly complex. But for the purpose of motility, I want to highlight two specific ones that are absolutely critical for listeners to appreciate. VIP, which stands for vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, and a simple gas molecule, nitric oxide, or NO.
And these are the relaxers, right? The inhibitory ones.
They are. And this brings us to a major physiological principle that you have to grasp to understand the gut. In the gut, relaxation is an active process.
What do you mean by active? Isn't relaxation just Stopping the contraction?
Mm-hmm.
Taking your foot off the gas?
In skeletal muscle, yes, you stop sending the go signal from the nerve and the muscle relaxes. But in the gut, especially at the sphincters, the smooth muscle often has a baseline level of tone. It wants to stay clenched.
It defaults to closed.
It defaults to closed. So to open a door like the lower esophageal sphincter or the sphincter of Oddi, the enteric nervous system, has to actively fire specific inhibitory neurons. These neurons release nitric oxide and VIP, which then force the muscle to relax.
So if those specific relaxed nerves fail to fire, the door stays locked shut.
Exactly. And that's the basis for diseases like achalasia, which we'll definitely get to later. If you lose the ability to actively relax, you have a functional obstruction, even if the muscle itself is perfectly healthy. The off switch is just as important as the on switch.
So the ENS is the local captain, the autopilot. But the brain upstairs, the central nervous system, isn't totally absent from the picture. It acts as a modulator, right?
That's the perfect way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
The ENS is the autopilot. It can fly the plane on its own most of the time. The autonomic nervous system, that's the brain's connection, is the pilot who can grab the control stick when necessary to adjust the course.
And we have our two familiar inputs here, parasympathetic and sympathetic.
Right. The parasympathetic system, which comes mainly via the vagus nerve and some sacral nerves, is the accelerator. It's your rest and digest system. It stimulates the ENS, it cranks up the activity, increases motility, increases secretions.
In the sympathetic system,
The sympathetic is the brake. This is your fight or flight system. It originates from the spinal cord and synapses and prevertebral ganglia. It releases norepinephrine, which does two things. It inhibits the ENS neurons, and it can also directly inhibit the smooth muscle itself.
so if you're running from a tiger, or maybe more realistically, giving a stressful presentation.
Right. Your body intelligently shunts energy and blood flow away from non-essential tasks like digestion. It says, we do not have the bandwidth to process a sandwich right now. All resources to the muscles and brain. The sympathetic system can clamp down so hard on the gut that it can block movement entirely.
Which brings us to blood supply. We have to talk about the splanchnic circulation. Guyton describes a mechanism here related to blood flow in the vela, those tiny, finger-like projections that absorb nutrients, and honestly, I found it kind of terrifying.
It is. It's a classic example of a physiological trade-off. It's an efficient design for one purpose that creates a major vulnerability for another. It's essentially a design flaw.
So what's the flaw?
Okay, picture a single villus. It's a tiny little finger. Inside that finger, you have an arteriole sending oxygen-rich blood up the center to the tip, and a venule bringing oxygen-poor blood back down the outside.
So you have traffic going up the middle and traffic coming down the sides, very close together.
Very, very close together.
Yeah.
And their walls are permeable to oxygen. Now, because the oxygen concentration is really high in the artery and really low in the returning vein, oxygen has a strong tendency to just jump ship.
It shortcuts across.
It shunts directly from the artery to the vein about halfway up without ever making it to the tip of the villus. This is called a countercurrent exchange mechanism.
It's like a delivery driver who's supposed to go to the end of the street, but instead just throws the package over the fence to the driver coming back the other way.
That's a great analogy. Under normal conditions with good blood flow, enough oxygen makes it all the way to the house at the tip of the villus to keep those cells alive. But imagine you're in circulatory shock. Your blood pressure plummets. Your blood flow slows to a crawl.
The delivery driver is moving much slower now.
And because that blood is moving slower, it spends much more time in that exchange zone. A huge amount of the oxygen shunts across early. The tip of the villus is literally starved of oxygen. It suffers ischemia and can die, even when there's still some blood flow to the gut.
So the tips of the villi die first. That's the vulnerability.
Yes. In cases of severe shock, the gut lining can begin to disintegrate within hours because of this specific anatomical arrangement. However, the gut does have a backup plan, a sort of fail-safe called autoregulatory escape.
What's that?
If the sympathetic nerves are clamping down hard on the gut's blood vessels to try and save blood for the heart and brain, the local tissues in the gut start to suffocate. They produce metabolic byproducts that act as powerful vasodilators. Eventually, these local factors become so strong that they override the sympathetic constriction and force the vessels to dilate again.
So the gut basically says, I don't care what the brain says, I'm about to die down here and I'm opening the pipes.
It's looking out for itself. When push comes to shove, it has to.
Okay, so we've built the machine, we've wired it up, we've plumbed it. Now let's look at the choreography itself. Part 3. The basic moves. There seem to be two main dance steps here that the books focus on: peristalsis and segmentation.
That's the fundamental distinction. You can think of peristalsis as propulsion. Its job is to move the contents forward from point A to point B.
And segmentation.
Segmentation is all about mixing. In fact, its main job is to actually retard movement, to slow things down so that digestion and absorption have time to happen.
Let's break down peristalsis first. Guyton calls the mechanism behind it the law of the gut.
It's a beautiful hardwired reflex. If you stretch a segment of the gut, say, a bolus of food arrives and distends the wall. The enteric nervous system triggers a very specific coordinated pattern. It causes a ring of contraction upstream or behind the bolus,
Pushing it forward.
and simultaneously it causes relaxation downstream or ahead of the bolus.
The toothpaste tube analogy works best for me here. If you want to get the toothpaste out, you have to squeeze the bottom of the tube, but you also have to remember to take the cap off.
Exactly, that's perfect. If you just squeeze behind the bolus but the gut ahead of it remained tight, the food wouldn't go anywhere. You just build up immense pressure. You need that coordinated receptive relaxation ahead of the wave to create a path of least resistance for the food to follow.
And this is polarized, right? It's directional. It always goes one way.
Always. Towards the anus. The circuits in the myenteric plexus are wired in a polarized fashion. In fact, it's so hardwired that if a surgeon were to accidentally cut out a piece of intestine and sew it back in backward, food would move down to that section and just stop.
It would get stuck.
It would get stuck because the peristaltic waves would be trying to push it back up. The law of the gut is directional.
Okay, so that's how we move it forward. What about segmentation? How does that work?
Segmentation creates what Guyton describes as a chain of sausages appearance. Instead of a sweeping wave, you get these stationary rings of contraction that appear at spaced intervals along the gut.
Chopping the chyme into segments.
Exactly, they chop the chyme. Then, a few seconds later, those rings relax, and a new set of contraction rings appears in the middle of where the old segments were.
So it's not moving forward, it's just mushing it back and forth, to and fro.
It's a mixing cycle, and this accomplishes two absolutely vital things. First, it thoroughly mixes the food with the digestive enzymes from the pancreas and the gut wall. You need that for chemical breakdown.
And second,
And maybe even more importantly, it constantly rolls the chyme against the absorptive surface of the gut wall. The nutrients can't be absorbed if they're stuck in the middle of the tube. Segmentation ensures that every last particle gets its turn to touch the lining and be absorbed into the blood.
so by mixing, it's actually slowing down the net forward movement, giving the system time to work.
It's putting the brakes on transit to maximize absorption.
Now there's one more movement pattern that Ganong discusses in detail, and it only happens when we aren't eating. The migrating motor complex, or MMC.
Ah, yes, the janitor of the gut.
I love this concept. It's so intuitive.
It's absolutely vital for gut health. When you're in the fasting or interdigestive state, the gut switches from processing mode to cleaning mode. About every 90 to 100 minutes, triggered by a hormone called motilin, a powerful, uninterrupted wave of peristalsis starts in the stomach.
And it just sweeps everything before it.
It sweeps the entire length of the small intestine clean. It's like a street sweeper coming through after the parade is over. It pushes out all the undigested debris, sheds cells, and most importantly, it sweeps bacteria out of the small intestine and into the colon.
So it prevents bacteria from the colon from migrating backward or upstream into the more sterile small intestine.
Exactly. It's a critical housekeeping function. A failure of the MMC is thought to be a major contributor to conditions like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. If the janitor isn't working, the bacteria can creep upstream and set up camp where they shouldn't be.
And the sound of that cleaning crew at work.
Is your stomach growling? That rumbling sound, which doctors call borborygmi, we usually associate with hunger. But physiologically, it's often just the sound of the MMC sweeping air and fluid through the empty system.
And here's the really practical takeaway for anyone who's a constant grazer or snacker. Ganong makes it very clear that the MMC stops the instant you eat.
Immediate halt. The very first bite of food switches the system from cleaning mode back to digestion mode. So if you're constantly snacking, even just a little bit throughout the day, you never give the janitor a chance to come in and mop the floors.
That's a pretty compelling physiological argument for having distinct meal times and giving your gut a break.
It really is.
Okay, let's take this system we've built and go on the journey. Part 4. Mouth to stomach.
It all starts with chewing, or mastication. And Guyton makes a simple but profound point here. Digestion is a surface area game.
You can't digest a marble.
You can't. Digestive enzymes, like amylase for carbs or lipase for fats, can only work on the surface of food particles. If you swallow a piece of steak whole, the enzymes can only attack the outside. If you chew it into a pulp, you've increased the available surface area 1,000-fold.
And it also breaks down the tough cellulose walls of plants.
Which releases the nutrients trapped inside. And chewing isn't just a voluntary act, there's a reflex loop involved.
The chewing reflex.
Right, it's a rebound loop. When you bite down, the bolus of food presses against your gums and palate. This sensory input sends a signal that inhibits the jaw-closing muscles, so your jaw drops.
Okay.
That drop stretches those same muscles, which triggers a stretch reflex, causing them to snap shut again, compressing the bolus,
Right.
which then re-triggers the inhibition. It's an automatic oscillation that takes the load off your brain.
So we chew, we create surface area, and then comes the tricky part. We have to swallow. Deglutition. This feels like the single most dangerous moment in the entire process.
It is the traffic control moment. You have air trying to get to the lungs and food trying to get to the stomach, and for a brief, critical second, they have to share the same highway. The pharynx. One wrong move is fatal.
It's divided into stages, right? Voluntary, pharyngeal, and esophageal.
The voluntary stage is simple. Your tongue consciously pushes the prepared bolus of food to the back of your throat, but once it hits the back of the pharynx, you pass the point of no return. The pharyngeal stage is completely involuntary, and it is a masterpiece of rapid, split-second neural coordination.
So what happens in that split second? Break it down for us.
Okay, a whole cascade of events fires off. The soft palate lifts up and seals off the back of your nose so food doesn't go up into your nasal cavity.
So milk doesn't come out your nose when you laugh.
Exactly. At the same time, the vocal cords in your larynx clamp shut tightly. And the larynx itself, your voice box, is physically pulled upward and forward by muscles in your neck.
I can feel that if I put my hand on my throat and swallow. It moves up.
That upward and forward movement does two things. It tucks the airway opening under the base of the tongue for protection, and it helps the epiglottis, that little flap of cartilage swing backward like a lid covering the entrance to the windpipe. It's a blast shield.
And while all of this complex mechanical stuff is happening, the brain does something even more drastic.
It stops you from breathing. The swallowing center in the medulla sends a hard inhibitory override signal directly to the respiratory center. It says, power down. We have a package coming through the intersection. Nobody move.
It's just incredible that this happens automatically, flawlessly, thousands of times a day without us even thinking about it.
And then, once the bolus is safely past the airway, the esophageal stage begins. A wave of primary peristalsis, which is really just a continuation of the pharyngeal wave, carries the food down to the stomach. It takes about 8 to 10 seconds.
But what if something gets stuck? You know, like a dry piece of bread or a pill that doesn't go all the way down.
Then the gut's local intelligence, the ENS, takes over. The distension caused by the stuck food triggers a local reflex that initiates secondary peristalsis. The ENS generates new, powerful peristaltic waves right at the site of the blockage to try and clear it.
And this works even if the connection to the brain is cut.
It does. After a little time for recovery, the myenteric plexus in the esophagus is perfectly capable of clearing a blockage all on its own, the gut solving its own problems again.
So now we arrive at the gate to the stomach, the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES.
This little ring of muscle is basically the only thing standing between the delicate lining of your esophagus and a vat of hydrochloric acid in your stomach.
And Guyton explains that it's not just a simple muscle ring. There's also a clever mechanical flutter valve mechanism at play.
Right. The last inch or so of the esophagus actually tunnels through the diaphragm and lies within the abdomen where the pressure is positive. So when intra-abdominal pressure rises, like when you cough, sneeze, or even just walk, that pressure squishes the stomach wall against the esophagus, pinching it closed.
So it uses the very pressure that would otherwise cause reflux to actually prevent reflux.
It's brilliant, simple mechanical engineering. But of course, when the sphincter muscle itself is weak or relaxes inappropriately, you get gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD.
But I want to talk about the opposite problem, which you mentioned earlier, the clinical highlight of achalasia.
Failure to relax. This brings us right back to that critical concept of active relaxation. In patients with achalasia, for reasons we don't fully understand, the specific inhibitory neurons in the myenteric plexus that are supposed to release nitric oxide and VIP have been damaged or have died off.
So the sphincter can't receive the open signal when a wave of peristalsis arrives.
It can't. It just stays tonically constricted. Food and liquid pile up in the esophagus, which then dilates massively over time. The patient literally cannot get food into their stomach. It creates a classic bird's beak appearance on a barium swallow x-ray. It's the perfect clinical illustration of why the off switch is just as important as the on switch.
So, assuming the LES works properly, the food lands in the stomach. Part 5. The stomach seems to have three main jobs, right? Storage, mixing, and metering.
That's a great way to break it down. Let's start with storage. You can sit down and eat a very large meal. A liter, maybe a liter and a half of food and drink, and your stomach doesn't burst. In fact, the pressure inside it barely rises at all.
How is that possible? Where does all the volume go?
It's a beautiful reflex called receptive relaxation, or sometimes gastric accommodation. As food is traveling down your esophagus, the vagus nerve sends a signal ahead to the stomach saying, incoming. In response, the muscle tone of the stomach wall just drops out. It becomes loose and compliant, like a deflated bag.
It's like relaxing your grip on a balloon as you fill it with air, so it can expand easily without the pressure shooting up.
Exactly. But once the food is in, the mixing begins. And this is where Guyton describes a mechanism called retropulsion that totally changed how I visualize what the stomach does.
Me too. I always had this simple image of the stomach just squeezing the food out the exit, like a simple pump.
It tries to. The stomach generates these very strong peristaltic waves in its lower part, the antrum, that push the food down toward the pylorus, the exit valve into the small intestine. But here's the key. The pylorus is barely open. It's a tiny, tiny aperture.
So what happens to the bulk of the food when it hits that almost closed door?
Only a few milliliters of the most liquefied part of the chyme squirt through into the duodenum. The rest of the solid food crashes against the closed pyloric door, and because it has nowhere else to go, it's violently squirted backward, upstream, back into the body of the stomach.
It's a jet stream, a backwash.
It's a high-pressure hydraulic jet. This is retropulsion. And that incredible turbulence is what physically pulverizes the solid food. It's the mechanical grinding that shears the steak and the salad into a liquid paste called chyme. The stomach isn't a bag, it's a high-powered blender.
A hydraulic grinder. I love that. So that's mixing. Now on to the third job, metering. The stomach wants to empty, but the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, is the ultimate gatekeeper.
I call this the duodenal brake. You have to understand, the duodenum is a bit of a diva. It's very sensitive. It can't handle too much volume at once. It can't handle high acidity. It can handle unprocessed fat, and it doesn't like hypertonic fluids.
So it has a long list of demands, and it sends signals back to the stomach to enforce them.
Constantly. These are the enterogastric reflexes, mediated by both the ENS and the autonomic nerves. If the duodenum stretches too much, it sends an inhibitory signal to the stomach. Slow down. If the pH of the chyme arriving is too low, below 3.5 or 4, stop sending acid. If the fluid is hypertonic, wait, I need to deal with this osmotically.
And there are hormones involved too, right? This isn't just nerves.
Hormones are huge here, and CCK cholecystokinin is the big one. You can think of CCK as the fat sensor. When fatty acids from a meal hit the duodenum, specialized eye cells in the lining release CCK into the blood. CCK then circulates back to the stomach and puts a powerful brake on gastric emptying.
This explains why a fatty meal, like a burger and fries, keeps you feeling full for so much longer.
Exactly. The duodenum is essentially telling the stomach, hey, fat digestion is slow and complicated. I am struggling to process this. Do not send me any more until I'm ready. So the burger just sits in your stomach for hours because of the CCK brake.
What happens if this elegant metering system fails? You mentioned dumping syndrome earlier.
This is a classic complication of gastric surgeries, like a gastrectomy or some types of bariatric surgery, where the pylorus is bypassed or removed. You effectively lose both the reservoir function and the metering function of the stomach.
So the food just falls directly into the intestine.
It dumps. A large load of hypertonic, sugary food rushes into the small intestine way too fast.
And then basic physics takes over.
Osmosis. Water is pulled rapidly from the bloodstream into the gut lumen to try and dilute that sugary solution. The patient's blood volume can drop precipitously. They get dizzy, their heart starts racing, they can feel faint.
And that's just the start of it.
Right. Then all that sugar is absorbed very quickly, causing a massive spike in blood glucose. The pancreas overreacts, releasing a huge surge of insulin, which then causes a profound crash into hypoglycemia an hour or two later. It's a physiological roller coaster, all because that duodenal brake is broken.
It just goes to show that regulation is just as important as the digestion itself.
It might be more important.
Before we leave the stomach, we have to talk about the reverse gear. Vomiting.
The ultimate protective reflex.
Ganong discusses the neural control. We have the vomiting center, the medulla, but he also highlights a specific trigger zone called the area postrema.
The area postrema is fascinating from a neuroanatomy perspective because it's one of the few places in the brain that is outside the blood-brain barrier.
It's a window to the bloodstream.
It's a chemical sampler. It sits there and literally tastes the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. If it detects circulating toxins from bad food, from drugs like chemotherapy agents, from metabolic waste products and uremia, it sounds the alarm and triggers the vomiting center.
And the mechanics of vomiting are incredibly violent and coordinated.
It's a complex choreography, but in reverse. You get a wave of reverse peristalsis that starts in the small intestine, bringing bile and intestinal contents up into the stomach. The glottis closes so you don't aspirate the vomit into your lungs, which would be fatal.
Right.
Then the diaphragm and abdominal muscles contract spasmodically, creating massive intra-abdominal pressure. The LES relaxes completely.
Yeah.
And evacuation.
It's deeply unpleasant, but it's a critical survival mechanism.
Absolutely. Better out than in if it's poison.
Okay, let's move on. Part 6. Small intestine to colon. We've made it past the pylorus. Now we're in the long commute of the small intestine.
The small intestine is all about absorption. So naturally, motility here is generally slow and deliberate. The net forward movement of chyme is only about 1 centimeter per minute.
That is agonizingly slow. It takes hours to get through.
It has to. You need that contact time for the billions of nutrient molecules to be absorbed across the wall. But there is a major exception to this rule, the peristaltic rush.
Which we would all know as infectious diarrhea.
Exactly. If the gut wall is severely irritated or infected, like with cholera or salmonella, the ENS makes an executive decision to abandon the mission of absorption. It initiates powerful, rapid, sweeping waves to flush the pathogen or toxin out of the system as quickly as possible.
It's a dump the cargo, save the ship mentality.
Precisely. You become dehydrated because you aren't slowing down to absorb water, but the immediate priority is removing the threat. It's a trade-off.
Now, at the very end of the small intestine, we hit another border crossing, the ileocecal junction.
This is a critical checkpoint. It's both a valve and a sphincter. Its main job is to prevent backflow. The colon is teeming with trillions of bacteria. The small intestine is supposed to be relatively sterile. You absolutely do not want colonic material backing up into the ileum.
And the valve is designed to resist pressure from the colon side.
It is. But there's also a fascinating feed-forward reflex here that Guyton describes, the gastroleal reflex. This is a great example of long-distance communication in the gut. When food enters the stomach, it sends a signal, both neural and hormonal, all the way down to the ileum, which is meters away, telling it to wake up and start pushing its current contents into the colon.
Make room. A new meal is coming down the pipe.
That's exactly what it is. It's preparing for the new arrivals by clearing out the old ones.
So finally, we reach the end of the line, the colon, the storage unit.
The colon really has 2 distinct jobs. The first half, the proximal colon, is mainly for absorbing the last bits of water and electrolytes. The second half, the distal colon, is primarily for storage of waste.
And the movements here are different again. We don't really have segmentation. We have hostrations.
Hostrations are the primary mixing movement in the colon. The colon has these 3 long strips of longitudinal muscle called the tenia coli. When they contract, they bunch up the colon into these pouches or sacs, which are the hostra.
Guyton uses a great phrase for this. He says it's like rolling the earth.
It's a gardening metaphor. The hostral contractions slowly dig into the fecal material and roll it over and over. This ensures that the wet material from the center of the fecal mass is constantly being exposed to the mucosal surface so the last of the water can be absorbed. It's how you turn liquid waste into formed solid stool.
But these hostrations don't really move things very far toward the exit. For that, we need the mass movements.
These are the big shifts, the propulsive movements of the colon. They usually only happen 1 to 3 times a day, and very often they occur right after breakfast.
Why after breakfast?
It's another feed-forward reflex, the gastrocolic reflex. The stomach fills up with your morning coffee and eggs, it stretches, and that sends a powerful signal all the way to the colon saying, clear the decks, we need to make room.
So what happens?
A constrictive ring forms, usually in the transverse colon. Then, for about 20 centimeters downstream, the hostrations disappear, the colon becomes a smooth tube, and it contracts en masse as a single unit, powerfully shoving the feces into the rectum.
And that shove is what leads us to the finale, defecation.
a sophisticated process involving a mix of involuntary reflexes and voluntary control.
And we have two sphincters here, the internal and the external.
The internal anal sphincter is smooth muscle. It's involuntary. When the rectum fills with feces from a mass movement, the stretch receptors in the rectal wall trigger a reflex that relaxes this internal sphincter. This is the intrinsic reflex, and it's what gives you the initial urge to defecate.
But thankfully, you don't just go immediately.
Thankfully, no. The external anal sphincter is skeletal muscle, the same kind that's in your arm. It's under your conscious control via the pudendal nerve. You can keep that sphincter clamped shut until you find a socially appropriate time and place.
But there's also a key piece of geometry involved here, the anorectal angle.
Yes, this is crucial for continence. There's a sling-like muscle called the puborectalis that loops around the rectum and pulls it forward, creating a sharp kink about a 90-degree angle.
Like putting a kink in a garden hose to stop the water flow.
It's the exact same principle. That kink takes most of the pressure off the sphincters. To defecate, you have to consciously relax that puborectalis muscle, which you do by sitting or squatting. That straightens the angle out. Then you perform the Valsalva maneuver. Take a deep breath, close your glottis, and contract your abdominal muscles to increase the pressure.
It's a surprising amount of coordination for something we consider so basic.
And when the wiring for that coordination is wrong from birth, it's devastating. We have to mention Hirschsprung disease here.
This is the congenital condition Guénon highlights.
Yes. In Hirschsprung's, a child is born without the ganglion cells, the ENS neurons, in the distal part of their colon. No myenteric plexus, no submucosal plexus in that final segment.
So there's no control room in that section of the bowel.
Which means no inhibitory neurons, no nitric oxide, no VIP, no active relaxation. That segment of the colon stays permanently clamped shut in a state of tonic contraction.
It's stuck in the closed.
Permanently. The feces pile up behind it, and the proximal colon balloons out to a massive size, which is why it's also called congenital megacolon. It's a terrible obstruction, and it perfectly illustrates the theme of our whole discussion. Without the nervous system to actively inhibit the muscle and permit relaxation, the gut defaults to closed.
Wow. Okay, let's zoom out. We've gone from molecular gap junctions all the way to the geometry of the rectum. What are the big overarching themes or takeaways for you from this whole journey?
For me, it's the constant theme of regulation versus capacity. The system is brilliantly designed with reservoirs like the stomach and the colon and brakes like all the sphincters and the duodenal feedback loops, specifically to manage flow. It always prioritizes processing time over speed. It's not a race. It's a careful, deliberate assembly line.
And for me, it's the ideas of feedback and feed forward. The duodenum constantly telling the stomach to slow down. That's feedback. But then the stomach telling the colon to wake up and make room. That's feed forward. It's this constant system-wide conversation happening between organs that are feet apart from each other.
And the so what? Here, the reason this is so vital for any medical student or clinician listening is that you can have perfect enzymes, great acid, great lipase, great pepsin, but if your motility is disordered, you cannot digest food properly. Physiology underpins the pathology. Whether it's achalasia, dumping syndrome, SIBO, or Hirschsprung, the failure is in the choreography.
My final thought, the thing I'm left mulling over, is about that second brain. We started by saying the gut can function without the brain, that independent ENS. But we also know that our emotional state, our stress, through the sympathetic input, can shut it down completely.
It creates this fascinating duality, doesn't it? The gut is this autonomous, almost separate entity living within us, managing its own complex local economy, and yet it's intimately and immediately tied to our emotional state. It's a powerful reminder that we aren't just a brain in a jar controlling a machine. We're one holistic, deeply integrated system.
A system that dances.
A dynamic choreography.
Well, if you want to see the sheet music for that dance, we really encourage you to go check out the diagrams in the Guyton and Guénon chapters on motility. The graphs showing the slow waves and spike potentials are really worth 1,000 words. Thanks for diving in with us today.
It was a pleasure. See you next time.